Due to the graphic nature of this haunted place, listener discretion is advised. This episode includes depictions of domestic violence, suicidal ideation, and violence against children. Please use your best judgment to decide if this is an appropriate episode for you to listen to. We advise extreme caution for children under 13. If you or someone you love is struggling with suicidal thoughts or the impulse to self-harm, please seek help. The United States National Suicide Prevention Hotline is 1-800-273-8255. There's nothing supernatural about your pain. Sydney kicked her feet back and forth as she sat in the lobby of the Fairmont Empress Hotel, waiting for her mother to check them in. A woman with a wrinkly face who smelled of lavender and mothballs walked up to her. She asked Sydney for help. Sydney looked to the front desk where her mother stood talking to the receptionist. She had always told Sydney that old people needed the help of the young to get by in the world. She had told Sydney that even 6-year-olds needed to contribute where they could. Sydney didn't like it, but she had to be on her best behavior. So she took the woman's hand. Her grip was vice-like and freezing cold. The woman took them down a long hallway. Sydney asked where they were going. The woman told her that they were heading to the elevator. But they'd already passed it. She told the woman as much, but she shook her head. They were looking for the right elevator. The real elevator. A pair of stunning metallic doors waited at the end of the hallway. The woman told Sydney she needed someone to press the button for her. Her eyes weren't what they used to be. Sydney pressed the button and the elevator dinged. The woman let go of her hand as the doors opened. But there was no elevator car. It was only an empty shaft. The last thing Sydney felt was the hand of the old woman pushing her into the dark abyss. The woman returned to the lobby, looking for someone else to help her. Welcome to Haunted Places, a Parcast original. I'm Greg Polson. Every Thursday, I take you to the scariest, eeriest, most haunted, real places on Earth. You can find all episodes of Haunted Places for free on Spotify. And every Tuesday, make sure to check out Urban Legends. These special episodes of Haunted Places are available exclusively on Spotify. At Parcast, we're grateful for you, our listeners. You allow us to do what we love. Let us know how we're doing. Reach out on Facebook and Instagram at Parcast and Twitter at Parcast Network. This week, join me on a supernatural journey to the Fairmont Empress, an early 20th century chateau-style hotel overlooking the inner harbor of Victoria, British Columbia, and discover why, to this day, it's haunted. If you head north across the Salish Sea from Washington's Olympic Peninsula to the southeastern tip of Vancouver Island, you'll reach the historic city of Victoria, British Columbia. Established in 1843, it was named after Britain's Queen Victoria, who never visited Canada during her lifetime. Victoria is best known for its comparatively snow-free climate and its turn-of-the-century buildings. The man responsible for many of these chateau-style structures was an architect named Francis Rattenbury. He rose from obscurity to win the commission to redesign British Columbia's provincial parliament buildings. The positive reception of the renovation garnered him a job as one of the primary designers for the Canadian Pacific Railway. The CPR acquired land in Victoria's downtown, beside the city's stunning inner harbor, in order to build a French Renaissance-inspired hotel they called the Empress. It was to be 8 floors of turn-of-the-century opulence, another jewel in the railway's crown. Construction took 4 years and was completed in 1908. Ivy and other vegetation covered the main facade, and the building's roof is peppered with neo-Gothic elements and turrets that look right out of a fairy tale. Intricate gardens surround the Empress on all sides, making it a kind of oasis from the urban development of downtown Victoria. The hotel is said to play host to several spirits. An old woman haunts an elevator shaft because it used to be the site of the room she died in. The specters of a little girl and a hanged man can be seen in the guest rooms and hallways. But the Empress's most famous ghost is Francis Rattenbury himself. This is curious, as he didn't actually die in Canada. But his death and the scandal that preceded it were so painful and so dramatic that it's understandable he'd want to return to the site of his former triumph. Anything to avoid thinking of the darkness that consumed him at the very end of his life. Old Rats, as the school children of Victoria called him, had grown tired of the state of things. Once he'd been a king among men, the great Francis Rattenbury, the artist of the Canadian Pacific Railway hotels. But the city had turned against him. In his hope to pressure his wife to grant him a divorce, he flaunted his young mistress in high society. They hadn't found Alma as charming as he did. His commissions dried up. He could hear his peers whispering that his buildings were never that beautiful in the first place. He decided that if they didn't respect him, he would leave. So he went. They didn't respect him in England either. No one there knew who he was, the power and influence he had once held. They didn't even care enough to hurl a cruel nickname at him. He was once again a nobody. Perhaps it was partially his own fault. Alma was 30 years his junior, and he'd encouraged her to have her own friends, her own hobbies. He just hadn't expected his chauffeur George to become her primary friend and her favorite hobby. He'd heard them giggling together behind closed doors, and now George was leaving belongings in Francis's house, in Alma's bedroom. He was taunting his employer, baiting him. Francis didn't have the physical strength to defeat George. The alcohol had taken its toll on him. He'd picked fights for years with people who couldn't fight back, but George looked like he could be a fighter. So Francis confined his violence against George to the safety of his imagination, losing himself in visions of not-so-unexpected car collisions and arsenic poisonings. The most torturous part of every week was when George washed Francis's cars. He stripped down to his bare chest to do it, and Francis could see Alma peeking from the window. Francis wanted her to be there as he dunked George's head into the bucket. He would keep his eyes on Alma as George kicked and bucked, trying desperately to get his head out of the frothy water. Alma's mouth would open wide in shock, but she wouldn't look away. She lived for scandal, and in giving her such a violent display of his love, he'd have her back in the palm of his hand, as she'd been in Canada. Francis moved slowly from his chair, his back twitching with pains he refused to acknowledge. He walked softly toward Alma's suite. She was alone, so fragile, tears dripping from her eyes. The beautiful party girl that had entranced him had fallen away, and while she was the one crying, he was the one that felt exposed. He wasn't the man she'd been promised. He was a nobody now, worthless. They had done this painful dance before. The last time he'd threatened to take himself out of the world, Alma had cried and screamed and begged for him to reconsider. She'd thrown his accomplishments back at him, holding him until the fight had died down, and he'd sunk onto the floor and cried with her. He could feel the heat boiling in the pit of his stomach. He had been something special, and the world had ruined him. He wanted revenge. She gave him a faint smile. He smiled back, showing too much teeth. He told her everything she wanted to hear, and she rushed into his arms, and for one moment, things were as they'd always been. They'd spent several hours together, but his anger didn't fade. He snuck back into his own bed late in the night, but the room had been ransacked. George had a temper of his own, and it appeared that he learned that Alma and Francis were on the verge of reconciling. That made Francis smile. He stepped toward the powder room to wash up. Then he felt the blow of a hammer against his temple. Francis tumbled to the ground, George's body falling on top of his. They wrestled on the floor, kicking and scratching. The hammer fell out of George's hands. Francis captured it with grasping fingers, scrambling on top of the younger man. He raised it high and heard Alma's screams come from the door. She told George that this was too violent. Realization pulsed through Francis's aching head. Of course, this was at least partly Alma's doing. She had crafted her own scandal when he didn't give it to her. He almost loved her for it. She jumped on his back, telling him to go easy on George. Francis flung her off and raised the hammer again, but George was holding onto the handle now, too. He wrestled it out of Francis's hands. George brought the hammer down on Francis's skull. Francis reeled backward. He could feel blood pouring down his face, stinging his eyes. His head hit the floor. Somewhere far away, Alma was screaming. Francis's vision was going, but now he could see what mattered. Not the mahogany bed and the wooden floors of their British estate, but the majesty of the Empress. It was there, waiting for him, with its crisply uniformed men and perfectly waxed floors. The hotel looked as pristine as it did on opening day. He caught a glimpse of himself inside the elevator. No longer the 50-year-old man who'd left in disgrace, but the 30-year-old king he'd been. Old Rats was the great Francis Rattenbury once again. Francis Rattenbury was a self-made man. He falsified his own credentials when he arrived in Canada from Leeds in 1892, claiming to have worked with famous architect Henry Lockwood. But his talent and ambition ultimately matched his capacity for deception. He beat out 66 international applications to redesign Victoria's Parliament buildings at only 25 years old, leveraging that success into a meteoric rise. But Rattenbury was a nightmare to work with. His projects were constantly over budget, and to quote his biographer Terry Rexton, his character has received universally bad reviews. He quit halfway through the Empress's construction in 1906, claiming he couldn't work with the Canadian Pacific Railway's head architect, Walter Painter. Rumors of corruption and graft began to follow him, and he was accused of using materials purchased for commissions to renovate his own home. Francis was already married when he met Alma Pakenham in 1923. The two of them scandalized Victoria's society with their love for smoking, drinking, and showing affection toward Rattenbury in public. Soon afterward, Rattenbury's commissions dried up. The couple fled to England in 1929, where they hired 18-year-old George Stoner as a driver. Alma began an affair with him, which she claims Rattenbury consented to due to his deteriorating mental and physical health. But Stoner was a violent and jealous man. When he heard that relations between Alma and Rattenbury were improving in 1935, he confronted Alma with a revolver, then murdered Rattenbury with a mallet. Both Alma and Stoner initially confessed to the crime, but only Stoner was found guilty after Alma's lawyer claimed her confession was out of love for him. Alma took her own life beside the River Avon shortly after Stoner's conviction. The specter of Francis Rattenbury is more frequently cited in the buildings he designed in Victoria than his place of death in England. Visitors to the Empress claim to see a wiry man with a handlebar mustache dressed in turn-of-the-century clothing on the lower lobby staircase, surveying his achievement. Up next, we'll see that most of the other ghosts in the Empress are not so content with their final resting place. Now, back to the story. Constructed between 1904 and 1908, the Empress Hotel is said to be haunted by its architect, Francis Rattenbury. But not all the spirits wandering the hotel's halls have names. It seems that every large architectural achievement has its own share of casualties, consumed by the ever-changing building. And most of them never make it to the history books. When Jasper was little, his family took him to Victoria. His parents told him all about hotels, how they were special places that people stayed for days, where someone else did all the work for you. The Fairmont Hotel looked more like a castle, and he couldn't believe he would get to live here, even if it was only temporary. He ran around the lobby until he could barely breathe, dodging bellhops and stern employees until his parents said that was quite enough of that and took him upstairs for a nap. He was stunned at how big the bed was. He could be the king of the clouds from his perch on the pillows. But as his eyes drifted shut, he glimpsed someone strange in the corner. It was a man, tied to the ceiling. A rope was wrapped around his neck, and he swayed with the flow of the air conditioner. Jasper screamed and screamed until his parents came bursting through the door. The man winked at Jasper, his open eye bulging and yellow. Then he disappeared. Jasper hadn't been able to calm down. They eventually decided to move to another hotel. Jasper watched the ceiling of his new room all night, but the man didn't reappear. He wasn't able to sleep until he was back home in his own bed a week later. Jasper tried not to think about it. He grew up and lived a quiet life, keeping to himself. He spent more time with stained glass than people, restoring old homes, meeting houses, and churches. Then he got a call from Victoria. Some workers had unearthed a turn-of-the-century glass dome behind some plywood. Could he fix it? He said yes, without looking at the address. But as he turned onto Government Street, his chest tightened. It was the Fairmont Hotel. The client had reassured him that it would be a quick job. No holdups. All of the hotel's resources were at his disposal. Jasper could feel the bumps on his arms rising, a cold sweat coating his back. This time, at least, he was old enough to know that ghosts didn't exist. He was safe. This was only a panic attack. He could get through this. The majesty of the facade hadn't faded over time. The vine-covered red bricks gleamed in the sunlight, and the spires reached up to the sky. For a moment, he was a kid again, imagining princesses and dragons hiding within the walls. Jasper clutched his tool bag and marched up the stone steps and into the structure that haunted his dreams. The inside was empty. He'd expected this, but it was still unnerving. Stray beams of sunlight filtered in through the windows. Canvas drop cloths coated the floors. A few stray pieces of furniture had been wrapped up in plastic to protect them from the renovation process. He was early. No other workers had arrived yet. Jasper stepped into the ballroom, mounted a ladder, and got to work, pulling the frame from the ceiling delicately. He tended to think of his projects as living beings, dormant, waiting for treatment to restore them to themselves. He removed the light molding from the glass with surgical care, like peeling skin from bone. He worked fast, but every stray noise made him glance around the room to ensure he was still alone. He paused for a brief respite, wiping sawdust from his hands. Someone cleared their throat behind him. Jasper turned around, ready to greet his coworkers. The first thing he noticed was the feet. They swayed in the air, pointed inwards, with the ankle bones jutting out. A tremor worked its way up to the knees. In the years since Jasper had seen the hanging man, he'd told himself that his childlike imagination had made the figure much scarier than it was. He was wrong. Sallow yellow skin drooped from the hanging man's cheekbones, exposing muscles and tendons to the air. Spots of necrotic tissue bloomed under paper-thin skin. Faded gray teeth with large, gaping holes where a crimson-red tongue poked through. Those bulging yellow eyes were the only thing that remained the same. He was still hanging from the ceiling, But the rope itself was moving along the beam, floating slowly but surely toward Jasper. Jasper held his breath as he stepped carefully down the ladder. The man floated closer, smiling at him. The sole of his boot finally reached the floor. He took one step away from the hanging man, then another. His limbs were shaking too hard for him to run. He tripped over his feet, stumbling, barely able to catch himself on the wall behind him. He felt a razor-sharp pain at the back of his leg. An errant screw had embedded itself into his Achilles tendon. He tried to stifle a scream, but it hurt too much. This wasn't the phantom's doing, it was his own. He hadn't been careful enough. Jasper shut his eyes. This wasn't happening. He'd let his imagination run away with him. He tugged at his leg gingerly, trying to edge his calf away from the screw. But the metal threads made each small movement agonizing. Jasper took off his belt and shoved the thick piece of leather in his mouth. Bracing against the wall, Jasper pulled away from the jagged metal. He bit down hard on the leather, screams of agony ringing in his ears. But he was free. He stumbled forward, barely staying upright as he tripped over the painter's supplies. Something slid slowly around his neck, delicate and subtle as a snake. Jasper jumped and tried to pull away, but he was yanked backward and up, leaving only empty air beneath him. He pulled his head forward, feeling the strain on his neck. The floor was several feet below him as his legs swung limply in midair. Blood dripped down the back of his leg to the floor, leaving a growing pool of red on the pale marble. Jasper flailed. The intricate inlaid floor mocked him with its distance. He kicked his legs out wildly, hoping to find some sort of chair or table that he couldn't see. But all the furniture was in the lobby. He brought his hands to his neck, panicking even further as he recognized the strap of his belt. It wasn't long enough to tie to the ceiling. This shouldn't be possible. But as he tried to yank on the belt, he felt something cold and slimy grasp his hands. Massive, rotting arms lifted him up and back. Jasper begged for air. He pleaded with whatever held him to take it back, to undo whatever made this possible. The hands loosened the strap for a moment, only to tighten the loop one notch lower. Jasper's vision got fuzzy around the edges. He took in stray gasps of air, but the pressure in his neck was building. His eyes opened wide. The man floated toward the front of him. Jasper could see his own panic and fear in the corpse's eyes. Jasper's limbs slowed. Blood trapped itself in the edges around the leather. He tried to take one last breath. He couldn't. As his consciousness ebbed away, all he could feel was the motion of the swinging. Back and forth, back and forth, until it stopped, and the room went still. All construction projects are their own form of organized chaos, an unexpected journey of hiccups and discoveries. The Empress's transformation was no exception. During renovations in the 1980s, restorers were floored to discover a stunning stained glass dome over the hotel's ballroom. But sometimes people get lost in the hustle and bustle of construction, falling through the cracks. It is rumored that one of the early extensions of the hotel had a casualty, a worker who hanged himself in one of the guest rooms. Guests still say they see him today, swinging from the ceiling. Coming up, we'll tell the story of another unfortunate victim of Rattenbury's building. Now, back to the story. The already massive Empress Hotel underwent a number of expansions throughout its history, most notably one from 1910 to 1912 and another in 1928. These projects were followed by a $45 million restoration and renovation in 1989 that added standard luxury amenities to the hotel, like an indoor pool. The people who worked in the hotel during all of these alterations often had to get used to their constantly changing surroundings, even when these changes created deadly traps for hotel workers. Nuala needed this job. Yes, working as a maid was backbreaking and frustrating at times. The guests were sometimes gruff or even cruel, and that was when they acknowledged her presence at all. But if she was going to be a nobody, she wanted to be a nobody at the Empress Hotel. As such, she worked very, very hard. She was punctual and diligent, her appearance always polished but neutral. While she loved hairspray as much as the next girl, she kept her styling subtle and flawless at work. She could channel Tina Turner's Simply the Best look on her own time. Her least favorite guest was Mr. R. The old man was rude and clearly quite lonely. She avoided visiting his sixth-floor suite as much as possible. Her sheet corners weren't crisp enough, he said. She didn't polish the surfaces in the room until you could see your face in them. Nothing she did was adequate. Nuala knew that wasn't true. She had polished until her fingers were sore, so Mr. R had no right to complain. But still, he walked her over to the dresser to make his point. As she expected, her visage appeared in the gloss as she stepped closer. She was just about to point this out to Mr. R when he stepped up beside her, and his reflection didn't appear. Confused, Nuala looked from the dresser to Mr. R, then back. She opened her mouth to say something, but he was already ordering her out of the room, his handlebar mustache bristling like an angry caterpillar as he told her he didn't have time for her incompetence. Nuala tried to keep from crying, at least until she reached the door to the fire escape. Her hands shook as she lit a cigarette and looked over the harbor and gardens. She was arranging the housekeeping cart the next day when Mr. R passed her in the hall. He looked her up and down as if she was something stuck to the bottom of his shoe, then asked her if she liked working at the Empress. There was something vaguely threatening about the question. She took a steadying breath before responding. Of course she liked working here. It was amazing to see the harbor views every day, to clean and polish the beautiful architecture. It was good to take pride in your work, he said. She had a legacy to maintain. Nuala nodded dutifully. She watched him head down the long hallway toward the elevators, then went back to arranging the cleaning supplies. Her nerves got the best of her, and she accidentally dropped a roll of toilet paper on the ground. As she bent down to pick it up, she realized Mr. R had disappeared. She hadn't heard the elevator doors, and the hallway was a dead end otherwise. The door to his suite was behind her. Where had he gone? She told herself she was being nosy and placed the roll back on the cart. Her supervisor caught her as she turned a corner, telling her to go on break before moving up to the 7th floor. Nuala decided to take a smoke break outside. The wind whistled as she mounted the fire escape. No man, however rich or mean, could ruin this job for her. The next day, she steeled herself as she went to clean Mr. R's room. She called his name as she knocked. When she heard a muffled acknowledgement behind the door, she used her master key to get inside. He already looked irate. She braced herself as she replaced the unused towels, trying to keep herself from wondering if he ever bothered to wash. She'd used the wrong bedclothes yesterday, he said. Nuala looked at the bed. It was the same sheets, the same comforter and pillowcases. She asked him what he meant, but he avoided the question, saying she was being deliberately obtuse. She replied patiently, professionally, that these were the sheets used on every floor. She could even open another guest room for him to prove it. She asked how the sheets didn't meet his standards. He waved her away. That didn't matter. It was the look of the thing, he insisted. Nuala gritted her teeth and told him that she had no control over the look. It was meant to match the 1900s-era decor. Mr. R's displeasure was written all over his face. She had no respect, he said, no imagination, and no place in a building as grand as this. And then, impossibly, and to her own horror, Nuala spoke her mind. She told him she offered excellent customer service and phenomenal work when she wasn't being harangued by lonely old men with nothing better to do than yell at young women because he could. She clamped her hands over her mouth, unable to breathe for a moment. Then she ran from the suite. She careened down the hallway, her perfect hair falling out of its bun. All she could see at this moment was the door to the fire escape. A last look at the incredible view before she was barred from working at the most beautiful place in the world forever. She slammed into the door at full speed, prepared to catch herself on the wrought iron railing. But there was no railing there. There was no fire escape at all. She turned her head for just an instant, looking back through the open door to see Mr. R standing down the hall. He smiled at her in his old-fashioned clothes, a cigar hanging from his mouth and a cane in his hand. Then he winked at her, and Nuala fell. He faded to nothingness just before she hit the ground. One of the more colorful legends of the Fairmont Empress involves the tragic death of a young maid during some construction work on the hotel. Harried from a busy day, she opened a door to a fire escape without realizing the structure had been removed for renovation. She fell 6 floors to her death. This maid can still be seen tidying up in the corridors and guest rooms, apparently too busy to realize she's dead. The Empress Hotel didn't become the Fairmont Empress until 2001, when the hotel's parent company, Canadian Pacific, rebranded as Fairmont Hotels and Resorts. All the Fairmont properties were rebranded as well, with Fairmont added to their titles. But the citizens of Victoria were not pleased to see any changes made to a major piece of local history. When Vancouver developers Nat and Flora Bosa bought the property in 2014, they began their own $60 million renovation to update and restore nearly every inch of the historic building. The end result is a 412-room, 52-suite chateau that houses multiple restaurants and a spa. The guest rooms are brand new and redesigned, but things got more heated when the hotel's iconic ivy was removed in order to restore and preserve the brick facade during a 2016 renovation. There was a similar pushback to the closure of the Empress's Bengal Lounge, which is now used only for private events. The decision was so controversial that the Bengal tiger pelt that served as the bar's mascot was stolen. While the mastermind behind the Empress was effectively run out of Victoria, the hotel itself has been embraced as part of the city's historic downtown. The many supernatural reports around the hotel reflect the evolving identity of the Empress as Victoria grows and changes. The 2016 renovation returned the Empress to her full opulence, but there was always a darkness that haunted these halls. First, it was Rattenbury's ambition and cruelty. Then, it was Rattenbury himself. One can try to forget these unpleasant origins and the otherwise luxe accommodations, but they can creep up on you when you least expect it, like when the little girl or the elderly guest you meet next to the elevator disappears into thin air. Or when you wake in the middle of the night to find a swollen corpse hanging over your bed. Thanks again for tuning in to Haunted Places. We'll be back on Thursday with a new episode. And don't forget to come back on Tuesday for our Urban Legends series, available only on Spotify. You can find more episodes of Haunted Places and all other Parcast originals for free on Spotify. Not only does Spotify already have all your favorite music, but now Spotify is making it easy for you to enjoy all of your favorite Parcast originals, like Haunted Places, for free from your phone, desktop, or smart speaker. To stream Haunted Places on Spotify, just open the app, tap Browse, and type Haunted Places in the search bar. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Parcast and Twitter at Parcast Network. I'll see you next time. Haunted Places was created by Max Cutler and is a Parcast Studios original. Executive producers include Max and Ron Cutler. Sound design by Russell Nash, with production assistance by Ron Shapiro, Carly Madden, and Isabella Way. This episode of Haunted Places was written by Lil D. Ritter and Jennifer Richey, with writing assistance by Greg Castro. I'm Greg Polson.